My name's Josh Muller. I go by they, them pronouns, and I'm the president of the Melbourne Bisexual Network. I'm here with Megan. We're going to be talking all about bisexuality and invisibility. Megan is the vice president of the Melbourne Bisexual Network and goes by she and they pronouns.
Hey, how you doing? Coming to you from Bisolation in now Melbourne.
We're roughly talking about bi visibility today and what does visibility mean to us? What are some of the elements of how bisexual plus people are or aren't visible? And I guess as just a bit of a way to kind of kick off the presentation or discussion today, what does a bisexual person look like?
This is a really interesting question that comes up a lot, the idea of how we can flag ourselves as being bisexual, and that most of the time we either get viewed as being gay or straight. And there doesn't tend to be much assumption. We talk about is it by default? I think it's something that you've used before. It's that it's really, I tend to assume everyone's bisexual unless they tell me otherwise. But I also know that most people don't look at the world that way. So it feels quite easy to be not very visible as a bisexual person.
That idea of by default is kind of a pushback against what we sometimes talk about as the hetero norm, right? Like assuming people are heterosexual until proven otherwise. But I guess as a sort of thing that's evolved since then, with people talking about gaydar and being like, well, you can pick if someone is gay or lesbian either if they have a same gender partner or are actively saying, yes, I'm gay, but also if they're kind of flagging their homosexuality in some way through things like, I don't know, all of the stereotypical stuff, like gay men loving musical theatre or lesbian women loving carpentry.
Comes down so much to stereotypes, doesn't it? And it's the idea that it's going to be obvious who we are from how we present. And again, that introduces these interesting questions of the difference between identity and presentation. And that, as a bisexual person, is it my job to teach everybody that I'm bisexual, or is it just to exist as a bisexual person? And I think it's something that often as a group, bi plus people feel that, there's a certain element of responsibility to be visible. And I think that it can be a real positive, and I think it's important in terms of advocacy and activism, but I also think it can often feel like a big pressure to be presenting yourself as something that's readable to everybody else. I think you use this term legible, which I really like, this idea of how people understand us. And again, it's like I'm quite a complex human, just like everybody. So that's this idea that we could somehow present ourselves in a way that is easily understandable. And I think a lot of bisexual folk feel that pressure. And also that pressure that it's a job to have to tell people as well. And I think it's something that we are still having to do because it's so rarely the case that people see us as what we are. And that can feel quite difficult, I think, actually.
We sometimes talk about bisexuality or pansexuality as the only sexuality where you might need to come out to your partner or like that part of your identity or that your sexuality isn't obvious just based off the person who you're seeing at the moment. How are we read by other people? There's this concept or sort of like area of discourse called legibility. And being legible partially has got to do with the state and like how the government reads or understands you. And so, we talk about like, how are we recorded in the census? And in the census, it records gender. Up until extremely recently, gender was recorded as male or female only. And, there's been some stuff around including trans people in the last one, although it was pretty poorly done. But in terms of recording sexuality, that doesn't happen. And the government records same gender households or couples and also mixed gender or like opposite gender households. But any of the research from that will generally assume that same gender couples are gay or lesbian and mixed gender couples are straight. But what about the bisexuals, and how are we read? Unless we're given the opportunity to literally say, I am bisexual, no one will guess it.
So I think it's that the huge inconvenience of having people that don't fit the binary, and that's often, I think, how we're made to feel, that we are inconvenient for everything from data collection to just how we exist and how people can understand us and what box they can put us into, because we tend to defy fitting in boxes. And I think they're really interesting questions, because on a census, I would probably be recorded as a woman in a heterosexual relationship, and that is not at all what I am. But because of the circumstances of my life, that would be how it would be read. And I think it can feel really like it feels very confusing when you work so hard to try and understand who you are and how you fit into the world, to then have so much of that stripped away and be made into like a simple yes or no of your experiences. And yeah, I think that's part of why I struggle so much with the concepts of being binary, because I don't think any humans are. Don't get me wrong, I don't think that cis heterosexual folk are binary and fit neatly into boxes either. And I think it's actually really restricted for all of us, irrelevant of our gender or sexuality.
The kind of simplification and stratification done for ease of use, or ease of like operating systems, or ease of putting people into productive and non-productive units, has got a lot to do with destroying nuance, destroying difference, like erasing histories of people's bodies and lives and experiences. And that the state and various other institutions, that's very much their business to uphold the gender binary.
The terrifying consequences of non-binary folk, how the world might explode. Yeah, it's such an interesting idea, isn't it? Because like I said, I don't think anybody rigidly fits in any of these boxes. So the idea that we're coming along to tear shit up, I'm just like, well, no, I think we're just existing and trying to be honest about the fact that we are nuanced, which everybody is. And some of us, we don't have the option of ignoring some parts of ourselves because they're such big parts of who we are. And I think that, makes us question the binary and question all the ways we're taught to fit in. And I know it certainly has for me. It's made me question all the things I did because I thought I was supposed to, as opposed because I wanted to. And I think they're really important questions to ask yourself, like why you do the things you do. And I don't want to get old and think all the things I missed out on because I was trying to just be good. And I think that was a lot of being raised as a girl as well. Like a lot of my sort of feminism was around unpicking some of those things I did because I was told to, that I didn't feel like I had a choice in opting out of. And I think my bisexuality has just kind of exploded those ideas as well, and made me question much more broadly the things I do and why I do them, and wanting to make choices that fit me, not choices that make other people comfortable. Because a lot about discomfort in being bisexual.
Yeah. Like talking about being recognized by other people for who we are or what we are. People are social creatures. As much as you and I can say, I am who I am, this is something that I've searched deep inside of me, this is how I want to be or want to act, we are not islands. We're not existing in isolation. Our experience is inherently relational. And so if I scream up and down every street I'm bisexual, but nobody recognizes it, nobody knows really what it means, nobody acknowledges that that's my truth, or people act as if I haven't shared that information with them, that actually makes a real difference to how I understand myself, because it's this dismissal and rejection that it's very hard to hold on to something inside of yourself if everyone around you and the world around you says that's not real.
I think we see that so much with bi plus mental health, that bi folks in relationships where they don't feel that it's okay to be bisexual, they're the folks who are often struggling most with their mental health. And like, I can't tell you how amazing it's been. I've been with my partner for 11 years, and he has always accepted my nuance, and he's never been uncomfortable about me being who I am. And, you know, it doesn't make all my problems go away, but being loved as a complete person and being loved with all your nuance is such an important part of finding those acceptances in yourself, I think. That, and yeah, we need those things. It doesn't need to be from a romantic partner, but like, we need to find it somewhere. And I think my plus community has been a huge part of that for me. It's finding people where that is the default with a lot of my friends, is that we're all bisexual, so it's just not a thing we have to explain or talk about or make people understand about us. Yes, we experience it differently, but there's a lot of space to be ourselves with one another. And I feel often that's what I've lacked in some of my relationships with other people, is that space to fully be myself. Yeah, and that validation is really important. I think we can be quite dismissive of needing those things from people. And I think, like you say, humans need things from other humans. It's quite an inherent part of how we function. And
Right.
like a non-negotiable thing for most of us. So I think it's important to acknowledge that, like, it matters for people to see us, some parts of ourselves as we see ourselves.
Yeah. These systems themselves are invisible, right? I didn't know that I needed bisexual community until I found it, got to be a part of it, had that affirmed, and was like, oh, wow, I didn't realize that I needed this, but I get so much out of it. And like, it's not the most important part of my identity all the time, of course not. But sitting in a room with only people who identify as multigender attracted in some way for the first time, it was really powerful. It was really electric. And I think some of that experience speaks to, you know, when we talk about privilege being invisible and the norm being invisible until it's challenged, that heterosexual and also like cisgender people are affirmed in those things all the time, every single day, in hundreds of little ways, ever since they were a small child.
And the difference when you're not having those things affirmed in any way, or that, you know, that you only come to them by clawing your way up the mountain to acknowledge the truth of some part of yourself, which you've tried to like swallow down because it wasn't something you were taught that was okay. I think that there's so much of, you know, climbing to pride, you have to swim for a lot of shame to get to the point of being able to climb. And I think that's a really challenging thing, I think, for a lot of people to understand if they haven't interrogated different parts of themselves, or there weren't parts of themselves they couldn't ignore. And I know there's a lot of people like, oh, why do you talk so much about being queer, or why is your bisexuality so important to you? It's like, because it's a huge part of me that I didn't get to acknowledge for a really big part of my life, and it always existed. Like, I knew about it since I was young, but I also felt like I knew it was wrong. So it's something that I carried with me a really long time that was really heavy, and like finding places where I get to be that without feeling ashamed is so special. Like, it's really healing. It's really important. Like, you said, so many bi folk, when we're in a room with other bis for the first time, we're like, oh, like, it's incredibly enriching. You're like, oh, I get to just be here, and people aren't missing this big part of me, or they're not seeing me as something that I'm not, or they're not reading me as gay because my hair's short, like, or thinking that I'm a heterosexual woman because I look really femme today. Like, it's a magic space of getting to turn up as who you are, and I don't think I underestimate the importance of that for folks who've been, you know, steeping in shame for a lot of their lives. Like, it's pretty special.
Right. And especially if you are currently swimming through the swamp of shame, being able to see some people up there on the mountain waving and being like, hey, you'll get through it, and look at the path ahead of you. We've like put some, you know, put a base camp at the bottom of the mountain and some like climbing routes and things for you, and we'll help you up there, and you can join us on the top. And it won't always be easy. Like, sometimes there's storms, and sometimes you like slip back down into the swamp of shame.
And I love that idea that there's so much to celebrate about finding community, because it helps you manage those things. And I think that being in those spaces where you can be yourself gives you that little bit extra cushion for all the times when it's hard to be yourself, from the days when people read you wrong or tell you that you're in the wrong bathroom and those things. Like, it gives you a little bit more cushion for that. Oh, this feels hard, and also I have people in my life who love me and see these complex, nuanced, beautiful parts of me and love me with them, not in spite of them.
That step of loving with, not in spite of, I think is so crucial. And it's not something that'll happen immediately or overnight. Like, everyone is biphobic until they unlearn their biphobia. That's the norm. If you're watching this, you're biphobic, probably. And probably have some biphobia to get over, because that's just through our society so much. And I guess I'm speaking about the society that, like, I'm in Melbourne. You know, a lot of my world and family are pretty white, pretty like middle class-ish, but like there's biphobia in lots of different countries and lots of different parts of the world. And it pops up in different kinds of ways, but is part of the general kind of set of systems of like the gender binary and heterosexism and monosexism.
The glorious bag of crap that came with like colonization as well. Like all the very rigid restrictions about how you're supposed to live your life. That you know, where I'm from, I'm British and Dutch, so I've got a lot to feel really terrible about. And I think I'm learning more about like my history and how we've spread those ideas of how things are supposed to be around the world is, yeah, and also an important part of interrogating my biases and what part I have to play in them, and you know, how my history has impacted the world and those things. I think that's the hard thing about the minute you start to peel back the layers, it just like keeps going and keeps going. You're like, oh crap, there's so much to see. And yeah, and on that topic of all the stuff we internalize because of those things, and yeah, I have so much biphobia, and it's something that, you know, I'm actively working on all the time, and I'm an activist and an advocate and an educator around it, and I'm like, I still feel it. I created a workshop about it because I'm like, I really struggle with a lot of these parts, and I don't want to, but I do, and it's a product of so many things that I wasn't in control of. And I think it's really important to acknowledge that. It's the same way that a lot more people are starting to acknowledge their racism, that you don't have to be actively racist to be racist. You are. And that unless we're being anti-racist, we're a part of the problem. I think the same with homophobia and biphobia, is acknowledging it exists within you, and you kind of have to be willing to look at that to start to unpick it and to move into directions where you're not going to feel it quite so strongly.
Thinking about bi visibility in the age of Corona, where we're at the moment, something that like I jumped onto early on was TikTok, and I've been having a blast on there. But there's a heap of bi TikTok, which is super duper fun. Heaps of content creators making fun videos and things. Something that I've been really curious about is thinking about how bisexual content or bisexual creators who are explicitly bi are maybe ending up being seen mostly only by other bi people. And I wonder about kind of like cross-cultural pollination or like mixing of the rest of the LGBTQIA plus kind of communities, or with straight communities and things. Sort of like, who are we visible to?
Is bi stuff just for bi consumption? It's really interesting. I haven't really fully got onto the TikTok thing. Obviously, I'm somewhat aware of it, and I also have really enjoyed that like bisexuality is kind of having a big moment on TikTok. There's something really lovely about seeing that there are bi, because that's really not something that I've seen much of growing up. You know, I'm 33, and there really wasn't much bi representation in the media, particularly not autonomous from a bi perspective, or feeling like it at all represented anything that was connected to how I felt about life. And I've also loved what it's, you know, I've had a couple of friends messaging me things being like, oh, like they're realizing their bisexuality because of TikTok, and like having crushes on cute people on there, and there's something about that which is so great, because it's like people celebrating their bisexuality publicly, and other people being like, wow, this looks nice. Like maybe I'll start having a little look at these parts of myself and not feeling like I have to hide from them. So I feel like TikTok is responsible for many internal coming out over the last few months, which is a really wonderful thing as well, that helping people to acknowledge different parts of themselves.
What was being bisexual like 50 years ago, but before the internet? And I think from the stories that I've learned about and the histories that I've learned about, bisexual wasn't necessarily a word that was used much through the kind of 20th century until like later in the 20th century. But of course, those bisexual people existed. Like there were people who had multigender attraction, people who had partners of different genders, of course. And the more you start to kind of dig into it, the more you're like, oh, actually, they were leaders of movements. They were some of our like famous queers. They were some of our like biggest activists and creators and performers and researchers were bi plus, but they might not have necessarily identified as such. In fact, if they're involved in the gay rights movement, they probably identified as gay or lesbian. If they weren't, then they were probably identifying as straight, and maybe on the down low, maybe doing things in private, or yeah, maybe, you know, a lot of people are only kind of coming into bisexuality much later in life because they haven't felt they're able to when they're younger.
Yeah, and I think that really speaks to, again, how we record things. So, you know, if a man was sleeping with men years ago, they were recorded as being gay, or like secretly gay if they were doing it on the down low. And maybe the fact that they were maybe also sleeping with women or non-binary people just isn't a factor. There's this always assumption, oh, they were sleeping with men, so that was the thing they really wanted to do, so obviously they were gay. And again, that recording of one or the other, that's a recording of bisexuality as a concept, I think is, you know, there have always been multi-gender attracted people, there have always been non-gender conforming people. Like that's not, they're not new concepts, but how we're thinking about them and talking about them and recording them is new. And I think, I watched a podcast or listened to a podcast a while ago which was talking about that, just how things were recorded is not necessarily what they were. And that's really often my thinking about a lot of that being like, these bi folk have always existed. And like you say, often in the centre of things and been really powerful parts of activism. Because it helps me feel like pride in that as well, that we have been here and we have been caring about a lot of things and pushing things along and breaking down barriers. And I found a lot of pride in history, actually, and learning more about it. And I want to find out more, and want there to be more unpicking of the stories to try and find out who was actually bisexual, not just gay or lesbian.
Isn't that so complicated though? Because unless, like, let's say we got a document from 100 years ago and we could find out there was some evidence that they had partners of different genders, but unless they literally wrote down in their diary that gets unearthed, yes, I was absolutely super duper attracted to that person of this gender, and I was super duper attracted and, you know, like had great sex with this person. They probably weren't using the word bisexual 100 years ago. We can't guess people's internal experience of romantic or sexual attraction unless they have told us directly. Because otherwise, as you say, like, history is often written by historians, and historians, go figure, are like often just as much part of the kind of norms of society, you know, in our cultures, like white, cis, straight men often, that they're going to be coming with their own often unexamined homophobia and biphobia. Oh my god, the number of like sapphic, like women loving women pieces of art that that historians have said, oh yes, they are close friends, even though even though they slept together, obviously kissed each other, like had paintings of them kissing each other on the lips, like spoke about how much they cared for each other and had long-term relationships. Like, oh yeah, just good friends. Yeah, right.
It's just wild. It's wild, isn't it? The how we choose to see the things we look at as well. And yeah, and also I think it's as well as this idea that bisexuality is kind of a fixed state. Like that's not all. Like my understanding of it is very much just a space where there is space to be lots of things, and to have room for the people you care about to be lots of things too. So the idea of, I think still a lot of people are quite rooted in this idea of bisexuality as like two things, which the two things I think it is my own and other genders. That could be as many as there are for me. And again, that's not to prescribe that for other people. Some people it's more of a binary thing. But the idea again that my bisexuality is a constant, because we're not constant as humans. So why would our sexuality be rigidly one thing when it's changing as well? So maybe at certain points in your life you're attracted much more to certain genders than other genders, and that's absolutely fine. Like great, just go with the flow of that as much as the rest of your personality and changes in yourself. So yeah. And that's what I love about bisexuality is that room for me to be myself, not feeling I have to only do one thing or only be attracted to certain types of people, or just it gives more space to be honest for me.
The expansiveness of it and the like purposefully not choosing to limit, but to make a lot of space for different types of people in your life, different types of attraction, different types of dynamics with different people. That's really exciting and really wonderful. That my experience of having partners of different genders, that those different partnerships have all brought different things, pros and cons, but like wonderful different things into my life and helping me understand who I am, bring different things out in me as well.
Isn't that magical when there's room to be expansive and to explore, and not to feel like you can't look at something because you might like it? Or I think I feel like a lot of sadness for some of my friends who I feel very restricted by their sexuality or gender, because it's that realizing that you don't have to be. Is that and even if you never do anything about it, that's not really the point. The point is like allowing yourself to have space to feel what you actually feel and to think about what you want to think about without censoring it or feeling that it's not okay or it's somehow wrong. I love that spaciousness.
What I think restrictive sexualities like monosexual people of only attracted to one gender, what it brings into it is a certain set of rules of attraction, of who can be your partner or who can't be your partner. And because of those rules of shoulds, of restrictions, but also being in a world where non-binary people exist and trans people exist and masculine women and feminine men exist and all different genders, I think those monosexual sexualities actually are really quite kind of complicated in how they then are navigating people's expansive genders. Whereas I feel like and like that's not to say that there's anything wrong with people who are monosexual. Like, congrats, great, good for you, and be whatever feels most natural to you. And also, say if like years ago when I identified as like a straight man, in thinking about my attraction to women, what did it really mean to me when I was attracted to really masculine presenting women? Did that make me like less straight? Well, certainly society would tell me so. If I were attracted to a trans woman, does that make me like less straight somehow? and how does the kind of heterosexual norm dictate my attraction to gender versus attraction to like genitals and what kind of sex that I like should be having? That all of that is a total nightmare for actually working things out in the world.
Yeah, and so harmful for so many folks, isn't it? It's that feeling that we have to fit ourselves and our bodies into certain boxes to be like palatable by people, and that's a wild and awful thing to navigate as a person who doesn't fit in those boxes. And I think we see that how much harm that does through some of the statistics around who really struggles in terms of dating, and gender non-conforming folk and particularly trans women like are definitely disproportionately impacted by those things, and I'm really hurt by them, really harmed by them. And I have so much sadness about that there are so many folks attracted to so many different kinds of folks for so many different reasons that don't let themselves feel those things because of those rules. And it does so much damage to individuals, and it does so much damage to communities and how we view certain parts of the LGBTIQA plus spectrum. And that's just so sad. It's so sad, isn't it, that we don't just get to be ourselves and be loved as we are. Like, that's like, we all need that.
That's why I suppose I take great pride in being like a loud and proud bisexual non-binary person, and like being the president for the moment of the Melbourne Bisexual Network. That this work that we're doing is important, even if we're doing some smaller events, like having a smaller online presence, that kind of like creating that space and creating that visibility and showing people the way to Pride Mountain or whatever we were talking about before, I think is really special.
And just that beautiful expansiveness of being a queer person and connecting with other queer people and finding all those ways to explore all these different parts of yourself and feel good about them as well. I think we've had a few sort of small events recently, just connecting in with bi plus folk through COVID, because here in Melbourne and now that we're still stuck in our house 23 hours a day, and it's been so lovely just to chat with people, about all sorts, but about particularly like how our identity and our sexuality informs this period of time for us, and how it's been particularly hard in some ways. And also there's this beautiful resilience I think we have often as queer folk that, I mean, it's a hard-won thing, and resilience doesn't always feel like inherently a good thing. But I think that I've seen that a lot with my friends and the kind of conversations we've been having. It's something that we're prepared for the difficulties of this year in some ways, because we know that we need one another, and we know how to navigate difficult things and to talk honestly with our friends. And some of that has been really lovely to see. And I see more of my, cisgender heterosexual friends taking those things on and seeing how they're really benefiting their lives as well. And I think we have so much to offer, like the way that we think about things. And like you say, the work that we're doing is important. And I have to remind myself of that sometimes when it's feeling really hard, that it does really matter. And finding community with the bi plus folk with NBN, like that's been such a hugely wonderful part of my life. So I want to try and find ways to help other people connect with those things and feel better about being themselves.
One of the ways in which we're doing that is this series of videos, which we're going to do a few more videos over the coming months. And I am super duper looking forward to more conversations with you, Meg. It's always a pleasure.
Yeah. It's really wonderful to get to kind of deep dive into some of the more nuanced parts of being bi with other bi folks. And thinking about being genderqueer as well. Like it's wonderful to talk to other people who don't fit the genders that we've been given, and doing it from the comfort of our homes. The comfort of our homes through all of this is a whole new thing. So it's it feels lovely to be able to do this. So thank you.
Well, we might wrap up there for today, folks. But we'll say bye for now.
Bye bye.